to introduce Dr. Li Jun, who is the chair and professor of the Academic and Research Cluster of Critical Policy, Equity, and Leadership Studies, Faculty of Education, Western University in Ontario, Canada. Dr. Li has 2 PhDs, one from East China Normal University in 1992, and the other is in international education policy from University of Maryland in College Park, 2006. He has a very rich leadership and other professional experiences accumulated in a global context, with working experiences in Shanghai, Tokyo, Maryland, Toronto, Hong Kong, etc. Just now, Dr. Zheng and Dr. Li actually exchanged their greetings and had a chat in Japanese. So they both worked in Tokyo. Having led as chairman for the Hong Kong Educational Research Association, he currently serves as the president designate of the Comparative and International Education Society, which is the largest professional organization in comparative and international studies in the world. Dr. Li is a renowned expert in the studies of education in China, East Asia, and Africa, focusing on improvement studies in comparative education and international education, higher education, teacher education, citizenship education, and civil society. I want to add a personal touch to the introduction as well. I came to know Dr. Li more than 30 years ago when he was pursuing his PhD in Shanghai in late 80s. And I was a graduate student at East China Normal University at that time as well. I admire his rich working experiences and his academic achievement. So Dr. Li will give us a talk first. Please feel free to post questions in the chat box. Toward the end, we will open up for questions and answers. So with that, let's use whatever emojis you want to use to welcome Dr. Li. And the floor is yours, Dr. Li.
Thank you very much, Jianping. It's a great personal honor to be part of the lecture series organized by Timothy Light Center. And actually, I admire a lot the achievements of the center led by Dr. Zheng and also her colleagues together. I have visited Michigan twice, enjoyed the trips together, and mainly to visit my old friend, Jianping, as he just shared with us. And also, maybe I have run into Dr. Zheng in Tokyo sometime. That's around 20 years ago. Sorry, I cannot recall that. However, that could be highly possible. And I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to meet you all. And good afternoon again, everybody. Please allow me to share my screen so that I can pull up my PPT. I hope you can see my PPT clearly from your screen. If you can, please give me a thumb up. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, we are actually neighbors. We're neighboring states. Canada, we call it a province, right? By car is just like a half-day ride. So very close. However, due to the pandemic, I haven't got the chance again. After I come back to Canada, after my 10 years service in Hong Kong, Hong Kong University and other institutions in Hong Kong, I haven't got the chance to visit Michigan, Kalamazoo again. And that, of course, I look forward to that for our friend reunion and also meet new friends. Well, how should I start? When the Timothy Light Center approached me for this invited talk, I was thinking about what could be a good topic for this. because I have to consider who will be the audience today. And that will, the talk could be very different. Sorry, I only have very limited knowledge and information about this. So I just prepared my talk, but I will see how that will go. And I do prepared, I think, roughly 40 slides. I was told that I will have roughly like 1 hour first for my lecture. Then we will have some good minutes for Q&A. Am I right? If I'm not right, please do let me know. Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Zhang. As you can see, the right side of my screen, that's my topic and also contact. On the left side, I use this opportunity to do a little bit promotion. Well, the book, I call it the Little Red Book, was published in 2016. Actually, it's not a new book. The focus is on policy implementation with a typical case identified in the Chinese context. The central theme is about teacher education. And I feel it's relevant, so I put it here, and some key concepts and also framework were actually adapted from this book. As to this book, it took me around 10 years almost to finish everything, and before I sent it to Springer for publication. It's based on my second PhD thesis, which was finished in 2006 at the University of Maryland. To myself, actually, Jianping already introduced, I always call myself as a traveling scholar. By traveling, I mean, since my secondary school, I didn't stay in my original hometown to study, and always travel around for different programs, and later for different institutions for my job. And now I'm based in Little London, Canada. In terms of my academic interest areas, I'm basically a comparativist, but my focus is on policy. Especially in recent years, I developed my interest on educational improvement science, still around policy, teacher education, and the comparative. So currently, I'm serving as the Vice President of Comparative and International Education Society. And you all know that this is a 4-year term, and move from VP to President-elect, and President, then past President for the 4 years. I hope you also enjoy the CIES community if you had before. But if you haven't, please do join us. Next year, that will be Minnesota, April 18, 22nd. And 2023 conference will be held in Washington, D.C. And that will be my turn as the key leader to plan and organize the annual event. And with this opportunity, I welcome you all to join me, to join the bigger gathering of the community. I'd like to just give you a short introduction of the talk I planned. Mainly, there will be 5 parts. That's the first is the Chinese context of education. Second is performance in learning, teaching, and schooling in China. And third, that's behind the China miracle. And the fourth point is about challenges that the Chinese learners, educators, and educational leaders face nowadays. And the last part is the implications and prospects reflected also for American teachers, policymakers, and other stakeholders, as well as the global scale for other countries. So let me start with the China context of education. If I bet everybody is familiar with this picture produced by Wikipedia, right? And when we look at the United States or Canada, we are in the center of the world. But China is just exactly the opposite of the Earth. And from the Chinese lens, the China is the center, just exactly like the Chinese characters of the nation's title, literally. But I made this map to give you a sense and remind you of the how it is related to educational context in China. You will see three different colors. That's blue, orange, and also green. So in the green area, we normally call it the East Coast area, just like probably East Atlantic region in the United States. And the blue part is the central mountainous region in the United States, if you may imagine that way. And the western part, of course, that's even bigger part, and you will see that the highlands and the prairie and the deserts and so on. So, and it's underdeveloped. It's a traditional way to categorize Chinese economic regions, and also combined with the political regions together. You will see in the east part is kind of more developed regions, and the central part is kind of less developed, and the west part is the least developed region. And I put three cities named there. You can see Beijing, of course, that's capital of China, but you see Shanghai, where I was from before I went abroad. And also in the south, that's Shenzhen, just near Hong Kong. That's the neighbor of Hong Kong. I indicate these different regions so that you can have a sense how my talk may develop later on. Here are some basic statistics. It's easy for you to find it out. However, I just want to use this chart to show if you add the total number, the total student number of elementary, junior, and senior in 2020, the number will rank at around, I think, 180,000, no, 180 million, right? Well, what's the sense of that? It's 4 times of the population in California, right? 18 times of the population in Michigan, more than 20 times than that in the New York City, right? My point is here, it's almost impossible for a country to offer decent education to all these students with huge numbers, the population, right? Then the next chart actually shows the teachers' numbers. You will see totally there will be like, I think 12 million teachers in China. If you consider that number in the United States, that's 3.2 million teachers. That's roughly 4 times more than that in the United States, right? So how these teachers are, if in the capitalist mentality, produced, right? And how about their professional development? How about their job satisfaction? And a lot of issues around that, definitely. I will move quickly to performance in learning, teaching, and schooling in China. I bet probably you all have checked this chart before. That's the first international testing conducted by PISA, organized by OECD in 2008. The results, that's 2009. You can see where is the United States here. You will see reading, math, and science. And that's first time that Shanghai students participate in this international testing. You will see the line right on the top and compared with OECD average. Well, this may not give you a vivid contrast, but if you calculate the numbers, like, in reading, let's say 556 minus 500, now how much more? It's easy for you to calculate, right? And for mathematics and for science. Well, probably it's not easy to simply say, well, Shanghai students learn 11% more than United States, the students in the United States in reading. But you may roughly imagine the difference over there, right? But this is not just for the single year. The latest one, that's 2018, still you can see, but this time that the more Chinese students participated in the testing, still we can use the same way to imagine the big gap, right? And the gap in terms of the number, or roughly the numbers, remained almost the same, or the pattern remains the same. So that's, in certain sense, is unbelievable, right? There are a lot of arguments, discussions on this. I will not repeat, but let's see how that may actually, the gap actually cause a lot of responses, especially like the United States, of course, the UK. The UK sent math teachers to Shanghai almost every year. It's already almost over 1,000 math teachers exchange through this program organized by Shanghai Normal University. So UK teachers and the UK policymakers really want to put into action how the Chinese lessons may be learned. And also you will see, if you say teachers are the key, then what could be the next? So you will see this is the book published by Collins, a well-known publisher for education, right? So, and they put the title, interestingly, both in Chinese and English, it's a real Shanghai mathematics. I don't know where we can find fake Shanghai mathematics, but that's interesting, right? So, and it's a book series. You can see the pedagogy, practice books, pupil textbooks, and so on. So, here is the book actually just came out right after 2009. I think that's 10 years ago, reflecting on the Shanghai miracle. Now, of course, we have more Chinese students participated in the testing. Lot of explanations behind that, and some would like to use like secrets. What's the secrets or the recipe for that, for the Chinese students? I personally, I wouldn't prefer to use a secret, the term secret, because it's not a secret, and you can see it. If you say it's a secret, something covered or hide, right? But it's not. It's obviously you can go there and observe with your pleasure even. But I would feel, what could the reasons to explain that? Of course, a lot. But among them, teachers teaching, if we compare with other systems, may explain a lot. For example, this is also from OECD's report, that's Taylor's 2013 to 2014. Taylor's, that's the Teaching and Learning International Survey, right? And you can see how, you see the differences. Shanghai teachers and the 34 systems participate in Taylor's test that around. But mainly you look at the 3 categories here, it means a lot. And that's the big gap between Shanghai teachers and teachers in other countries on average. You can see the qualification, a typical teacher and school environment. You can see, and teacher education training program completed for Shanghai students, almost 100%, 98%, right? And also full-time. In China, there's no part-time teacher there. Everybody is full-time employed. So you can see in terms of stability and also the sustainability to support students' learning, that's very important. And the next one you can see, actually that's kind of principles background. Again, if you highlight these 4 categories, that's qualification and the training programs, the Shanghai principles enjoy the highest, almost the full percentage of these training programs or qualification. That also means a lot. This is an interesting chart. If we look at this, the new teachers, right? Normally, new teachers may encounter, the new environment and a lot of challenges in the new working place. And the access to and the participation in formal induction programs becomes the key, right? And you can see here, Shanghai in pink, you can see in terms of both access and participation on the higher end. But if you see in the red box, the United States and also Canada represented by Alberta, a northwest province, you can see that percentage is much lower than those of the Shanghai new teachers. And here is also the participation rates and average number of days for each type of professional development in a year. So for this small chart, you will see on the right side, that's the Shanghai teachers, right? And on the left, that's OECD average. There's the big gap between each category, right? And that category you can see on the left, you will see the course workshops as training program, educational conference and seminar, the second column, and the second row, observation visits to other schools, that's very popular in China, and in-service training and so on. So that also explains the difference, right? And what could be a typical lesson in the classroom, the working hours per week? You can see in terms of teaching, planning, marking, administrative work, teamwork, and so on, you'll see Shanghai students, Shanghai teachers actually almost excel in all these categories except for the first one, the teaching. So the teaching time is significantly shorter than the average of OECD countries. In other words, those systems participate in this test, actually they are overloaded with teaching hours if you compare that with Shanghai teachers. And also, you can see from these 2 small piles, you will see how a teacher's time in the classroom is divided, right? So the administrative and keeping the classroom management, that time are much lower for Shanghai teachers. In other words, students in Chinese classrooms are much easier for teachers to manage. And they have, well, maybe because of a good learning pattern or habit developed from the very early stage, or pressures from parents or the community, or just the kind of tradition of the school, right? But anyway, here explains how actually students can focus on learning through teachers teaching in the classroom. Again, how teachers look at themselves and how they may judge what they feel about their job satisfaction, together with the principles. Here you will see this in the parallel Shanghai teachers and the principals, and also those in the United States. You will see that for the first one, teachers believing they can help students to value learning, Shanghai teachers, the number is much higher, almost more than like 12 to 15% higher. Teachers believing they can help students to think critically, well, more or less the same, not big difference, right? Teachers agreeing that teaching is valued socially. Here you can see the significant gap, right? And also for the job satisfactions, almost the same for both teachers and the principals in both countries. So you can see for the first few, it's about values, right? This is values are all more related to a culture and socio-political settings there. Well, here's a chart I made to calculate, in terms of the subject ranking conducted by the QAs. Some of you may be familiar with that. That's basically about education. And I use Japan and China as a pair to compare. You can see for Japan, traditionally, Faculty of Education, the Graduate School of Education at Tokyo University, at the Kyoto University, and the Waseda University. Waseda is a private institution, but both Tokyo and Kyoto universities are public institutions. I particularly choose both public and private, and they're representing Japanese, the College of Education in the concept of the United States. Right? Like University of Maryland, we have a College of Education. We never call it Faculty of Education. That's a British tradition there. But if we compare that with the Chinese universities, I choose the Peking University, ECNU. That's where I actually have studied and worked before. Beijing Normal University, you will see the in terms of ranking over these years from 2014 to 2021. That's this year. The newest data became available, I think, several weeks ago or months ago. I cannot recall that. However, you will see the shorter the bar is, the higher the status in the ranking system. So you will see, you can compare that. And already Japanese education, of course, also Chinese education, have been admired even in 50s, 60s, and 70s by American counterparts, right? So here it's a little bit more about how these teachers are prepared, right? So this is a big macro and historical view of how teacher education has developed in China since its very beginning. China learned from Japan, Japan learned from France and European systems, and also, of course, United States. This is how I divided the different stages of teacher education development. You may not agree with me. However, my sense is not about this. You will see in different historical stages, you will see how this Chinese system has learned from other systems. In the very beginning, from Japan, from France, and in the institutionalization stage, that's from French and US system, and going on. So you will see how this system has been open and diversified, not only limited to one tradition. Actually, in terms of teacher education, China is a latecomer. So that's the current system in China in terms of teacher education. So it's an open system. By open system, I mean it's a combination of like the College of Education in the United States normally upgraded from normal schools in the early stage, now in the comprehensive state universities, just like Western Michigan University or University of Maryland and so on, right? That's just a more comprehensive model. But China has that model and also has a specialized independent model, what they called normal university. But this term actually was translated literally from French, normal. It's not used in the common sense, normal university or what could be a abnormal universities, right? And also new curricular standards for teacher education. And I just want to show you some examples of this system. That's ECNU. That's well, this is a big building on campus since late 80s. Of course, there are many new tall buildings on campus right now. I like this building very much because I used to work on the 12th floor, the window over there facing to the sun. You can see from the picture, right? That's a comprehensive university, actually. Itself, it has a lot of schools of like, of course, education, right? But it's not limited to that, like a business school and School of Science and so on. This is more comprehensive, the model. This is the Peking University, as you can see, but this model is not the dominant model. It's just a supplementary model. They may be, I actually have been imagining, it could be a third model in China. Mainly, that's a model invented by Japan. And you may know in Japan, there are, I think currently there are 9 or 11 educational university, 교육대학. That's education university. That's mainly designed, transformed and designed shortly after the Second World War to meet the high demand of teachers from kindergartens and elementary schools. So it's mainly a teaching institution. But if you recall the numbers I shared with you earlier, the huge student population. So this kind of specially set up model could be very helpful. As far as I can recall, when I was studying at the University of Maryland, that time, every year, Maryland was short of like 3,000 teachers. So that time, I recommend to my American colleagues, why don't you set up a specialized system for teacher training, right? Of course, some of you may argue with me, well, that will be the opposite trend, a kind of flipped upside down of the historical development of teacher education in the United States, because basically the United States has adopted a teacher education model in comprehensive state universities. These are the policies, strong support by policies and national implementation. I would feel that's very important and is especially meaningful in the Chinese context. And you all know that China is a centralized country in terms of governance and political system and so on. Of course, that also include the educational systems, right? So that's very powerful in terms of implementation. To explain further, this could be the national ideologies actually with regard to learning, teaching, and schooling in China, as I summarized here. But each actually is a huge topic, deserved more than 10 PhD theses, I guess, right? But if we, let's look at the rich heritage of Confucianism, which some people will say, well, we'll like to use the chopsticks culture to describe that. But if you look at the chopsticks that ordinary Chinese people are using every day, at least 3 times a day normally, right? And you will feel that's amazing symbols, because when you're using chopsticks, you develop the relationships. You cannot use just one chopstick, right? They must be used in pairs. At least you can learn these are 2 things. It's easier for kids to develop that kind of math concept from the very beginning with hands-on experience there. And how you may handle the 2 chopsticks in one hand with your fingers, right? So I think that's actually expand the essence of Confucianism. It's focused on human relationships. And if you look at the teacher-student relationships in the classrooms, on campuses, and even after schools, they're very, very different from that in the United States or in Canada, right? In Canada, Ontario, we have teachers who go to school to work, but normally after school, you don't see much that a teacher will follow up with the students' parents or the students for any further preparation, review, and so on. And that kind of relationship is very different. And the nationwide, a kind of catch-up mentality for nation building and global status, that's also a big reason, because that's driven by national ideology. And that's also integrated into curriculums for students to learn, right? And there are 2 political discourses which have been developed since, I think, the early 80s, the modernizational theory and also human capital theory. Since Schulz visited China in, I think, in 1980s, that year, and the national leader Deng Xiaoping received him to look for solutions of China's development. And Deng Xiaoping was serious and accepted Schulz's theory to develop human capital. And you will see 30 years later, 40 years later, you will see the outcomes of this development. The last category is internationalization of education, of course. As you can see from the chart I put about teacher education development in China since 1897, China has been very open, except for the very limited political period. So what could be the challenges for Chinese system? I will start with a timetable. This is a timetable in Shanghai, and you can imagine where Shanghai is located in China with that map I created earlier, right? That's for elementary schools. You will see when the first the students need to go to school. You can see that. Well, let me highlight that. You can see the time here, right? And when students finish, here is the time that students finish. So you calculate the time altogether, right? And that's for elementary. That's elementary school in Shenzhen. You know Shenzhen, where Shenzhen is, right? You can see Sorry, I couldn't translate all of them, but you look at the left column, you will get it's about time. You will guess how this daily timetable has been made, right? That's for boarding school. That's for boarding school. So get up 6:30, right? And how the time was managed by 9:30 in the evening, students go to sleep. This is the secondary school, boarding school in Shanghai. I got the nice translations here. So you will see a day, what a day could look like. From 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the evening, with some big breaks in the middle, and with some like even noon concert, associational events, and so on, right? And all with these classes, formal classes, and self-guided learning in the evening, and so on. This is also, this one is a secondary school in Shenzhen. So you can see that it's more or less almost the same. So that's quite, but if you look at that in the United States, this is a timetable in a secondary school in San Francisco, California. You will see the first session is starts from 9:15, right? And when it's finished, you will see when it's finished by, if I draw, there will be 3:30, right? You can see what could be the difference. And in Canada, this is the secondary school in Ontario. You will see here, morning session, the first class starts 8:15. Then in the afternoon, 2:30, students going home. That's secondary school. That's secondary school. So you will see the big gap in terms of hours spent in schools. So if roughly you calculate that, secondary school students in China spend almost 10 hours on learning a day, I mean. So if you calculate that for those in the United States or Canada, that's like roughly like 6 hours, even not yet about that number, even shorter, right? So that's a big difference for a day. And if you think of that in a year, and 3 years for the whole senior high school. So the learning pressures, of course, are a big challenge to almost everybody. This is just the recent news. I'm sorry, I didn't find time to translate it, but I can summarize it easily. That's a 13-year-old girl who committed suicide. And she passed away on October 24th. That's just roughly 2 weeks ago. That's October 11th and 14th. She wrote how she feel about the learning pressure in schools. She feels there's no choices, no options for her, and always the pressures around. It's around, and in school, at home. And the whole system serves as a kind of, well, even there is supporting teachers or other staff in school, and still students cannot even fight for a bit moment of, let's say, leisure time. So the girl wrote, when I read this, I feel it's horrible. I feel deeply sorry for her. She just feel if she is a machine, and with the electricity on all the time, she has to work all the time. Even it's an excellent machine, she asks herself how she may actually survive, right? That's a tragedy, of course. So this is just the challenges at the micro level. but there are big picture challenges at the system, institutional, and organizational levels. Again, I hope you can recall this map I created. So the first issue in the Chinese way of teaching and learning and schooling is the geopolitical disparities. I'm sorry, that's a typo over there. As you see the different regions, right? The Chinese government has tried very hard in recent years, and especially set the priority for development for the Western and the Central regions. But if you imagine the huge population and the huge size of China as a nation, this is almost an impossible task, actually, in a short time, of course. Market control has been pervasive since the late 1980s. That's the decentralization of educational management, and also in terms of funding and so on. So it becomes, in many occasions or parts of the system, uncontrollable. Racism, it has been a kind of hotly debated issue, and especially in the American political circle in the recent times, and also that in Canada. But I would say in terms of minorities in China, in terms of educational access and success, I don't feel that's a big issue, although there might be some hidden issues over there. Religious tolerance, of course, China is a secular country and never be dominated by a single religion, although in history, there has some historical periods that certain religions like Buddhism have had that kind of dominance, but very shortly. So in terms of this, I feel that's very weak. A gender gap, that's not as severe as that in Canada or in the United States because of the single child policy, right? Of course, it depends on which region you're talking about, especially in the less developed regions, especially in the Western rural regions, villages, that could be very severe also. Broader inclusion for those students with special needs, I think they are enjoying better protection and support nowadays, but still there is a long way to go, especially in terms of public access to different resources for learning. This also has been my concern for long. And when I went to Japan in the mid to late 1990s, I focused on citizenship education in Japan and China. I did a comparative study on that. But I feel recently there is kind of trend that global citizenship education is not highlighted, at least it's not focused, not attached importance accordingly. I feel this should be changed through policy and implementation in the future. Because simply nowadays, especially when we consider globalization, I chatted with Professor Lee earlier, that's more important, right? So if we look at these two big pictures all together, how these two giants can deal with each other together with the rest of the countries in this limited Earth, that's a big issue for almost everybody, and nobody can escape from that kind of discussion, I feel. This is how I actually put together the more challenges almost every learner, every teacher, every principal, or every policymaker is facing here. the complex interplay of globalization, regionalization, and localization, right? Where could be the balance? Where could it be the balance? Well, China has been open since late 70s. That's 1978. But not in every ground. In some grounds, in recent years, the trend could be different actually, and I think the directions also changed. So that's a big issue also, if you only highlight localization. The second big challenge, institutionally and systematically, that's addictive panacea of technocracy, digitalization, and internetization. We feel, and it's easy for people to simply believe that with new technologies, our students learning, our teachers teaching, and our principals leadership will become stronger. Not necessarily. And especially when kids are placed in front of a screen, conveniently pricing almost everything, it's really hard, and it developed a kind of habit of learning, which may not necessarily help the kids to learn. So that's a big issue also. The third challenge is the pervasive utilitarianism of politicalization, marketization, and also pragmatism. So you can see the political hand, market hand, and also the pragmatic hand everywhere, and all measured by money and profit and the visible achievement. But education, of course, is not all about that. So that's a big challenge, and nobody can live without it even. I feel quite pessimistic about that. And the last one is the over-enthusiasm towards democratization, pluralism, and individualization. It will be a naive to consider, to just conceive even once we have democracy installed, our society and our human life will become better. This is, of course, is a big debate, right? I think we must judge based on different contexts and how this may be actually adapted to different contexts to make it work in the right way. So here is the point. Don't misunderstand me. I oppose democracy, right? Of course, that's not my point. Implications and prospects reflected. I'm aware that time is limited. I will be quick. Well, I try to put together a few ideals of the Chinese model of learning, teaching, and schooling. Here, the first point is the Confucian humanist way for individual and societal development. So the first point is the value on learning, right? If I go to a local school in Ontario, I ask a student, what do you do in school? Pretty much I will get an answer like, well, I'm having fun in school. And the parents say bye-bye in the morning to kids by saying having fun in school, right? But that kind of value is very different from those in China. In China, when parents see off their children to school, they always say, you listen to your teacher, okay? You be focused on learning, right? And you spend hard effort, right? So that kind of cultural values are different. And also about the role of teachers. So in the traditional Chinese definition or philosophy about learning, about teachers, basically there are 4 dimensions over there, as I put it here, highlighted in here. Like, first of all, you must be a knowledgeable scholar, artistic and caring professional. Only caring will not work. That must be artistic, and also responsible public intellectual. as a final dimension. The second one is the practicality of 中庸. In Chinese, we say 中庸之道. So in China, the schools and the learning, where you can find a balance, that's always a central focus for teachers and also for students, right? And that's, of course, it's hard. And for every kid, every teacher, every school, that balance could be different. However, this is a kind of awareness for them to practice. So I would call it like the balance in the collective rationality and ethical commitments. The third one is institutional openness and diversity. So I already highlighted that earlier. I won't repeat. And the last one is even more important and also interesting. That's the integration of knowledge, of learning and social action. I put it in this way. So that's how I put it as a humanistic and a holistic approach of Chinese learning. And the last point I put it here, that's very different from that in the United States and Canada. Government must step in education, which is to be made best use as a fundamental instrument for individual and public good. Of course, here we must be careful. That could be very political also at the same time, if you are critical. So here are the lessons from the Chinese miracles. Nation building through education, boosting learning through great teachers. So when Chinese students, you ask about teacher learning stuff, they, kind of a nature response. They will show their respect to teachers, right? But I don't see that very often in Ontario. On the Chinese model I summarized earlier, and of course the open mindset for learning, to learn from other contexts. Global implications, I would say that the largest systems of teaching and schooling, which have benefited the largest learning population in the world. So this means a lot, especially to those who are still in the developing stage. For example, India, for example, Ethiopia, for example, Kenya, for example, the Philippines, right? These countries all have big population compared to their land size, right? The huge population. If you have a chance to visit Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, when you walk in the street, you will see the huge people walking around in the streets and poor people. You feel you have no way to help. That's what I actually feel at that moment. So I think the Chinese lessons makes a lot of sense for these countries, not only to United States and Canada. Matching socioeconomic advancement, China is in a much better off situation in terms of economy, right? And individual income. So that's different, and it's more affordable in terms of better education. The Chinese policy for education always aim at balancing excellence, equality, and diversity. This is, well, of course, you may argue for a few things may actually not support this claim. But in the policy domain, you can see that the policy communities, you will see that always in the policy document there. But the reality could be more or less different. That's something we should be critical. And also the Chinese lessons are likely to contribute to the global community in decades to come. Basically, the learning model, the schooling model, the teaching models have been dominated by the Western models for too long. And I think it's the kind of moments that we can have a kind of more equal exchange of ideas, of models, and also learn from each other. How can we do that? And how can we avoid certain traps in this policy borrowing? So I think, first of all, I think we should endorse a paradigm shift. The first one is from a deficit model. I mean, if we're pessimistic when the 2009 PISA testing results came out, it's kind of a sonic shock to American educators and the people, right? Kind of, oh, wow, we lag behind so much, right? But I don't think that's a good actually response to that. I would feel from a deficit model to a more advancement model, that will be a proper way to respond. And you may recall an old Italian movie, I think made in 1966. Then the title is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I don't like the third one, right? The good, the bad, why not the beautiful, right? So that means a different attitude towards educational change. The second paradigm shift is from an effectiveness focus. This has been very well focused even before 1950s, I think, still continue. And you will see the big international societies for that focus, I think, is too narrowed. So a more inclusive discourse of educational improvement is more important. Education is not all about effectiveness. It's not all about effective teaching. There are much, much richer contexts and meaningful conversation that should happen. And the last paradigm shift is from a mechanical mentality. Basically, as I criticized earlier, we try to rely on those new technologies, right? But why don't we adopt a kind of direction and value or even vision for a comparative gardening ecology? I mean, comparative, that means our system is open and we learn from each other instead of fighting against each other. That's not the way to living in the small earth altogether, right? Gardening, actually, the idea is from my summer work in my backyard. I grew up in a farming area, and I really enjoy farming. And I don't have a land in Ontario. I have a small backyard. So I decided to use my experience learned from my childhood to plant some good stuff, which I like. And I realized it's very hard in terms of gardening, right? So that's around the ecology, and that will help us to reimagine how education may be improved in the near future.